They called him a Vag in a suit, but by the time the sun dipped behind the trees that Saturday, the city of Fairfield would remember his name for something else. It started like any quiet afternoon in Fairfield Park. The breeze moved gently across the grass, rippling through picnic blankets and soccer balls. A boy named Ben laughed as he kicked the ball across the field. His older brother, Chase, waited patiently on a nearby bench wearing a black suit, crisp shirt, and polished shoes. Not for a funeral, not for a meeting, just because that's how Chase carried himself. Proper, controlled, always. His book rested on his knee. One hand held the pages down. The other adjusted the tiny LGBT pin glinting on his lapel. He read in stillness, letting the sounds of children and wind fill the silence. Then the engines came. 3 motorcycles rolled into the park, cutting through the quiet like blades. Parents paused. Kids stopped mid-kick. And Chase, without lifting his eyes from the page, registered the sound but did not flinch. They parked near the edge of the pavement. Grant, muscular, rough, and too confident for someone so young, hopped off first. He looked around like he owned the place, then locked eyes on Chase. 2 other bikers followed, each mirroring his cocky swagger. It wasn't the suit, really, or the book, or even Chase's silence. It was the way he sat like he didn't owe anyone a performance. And that tiny rainbow pin, it might as well have been a target. Grant nudged his friend. "Look at that, freak in a suit," he muttered loud enough to carry. Chase turned the page. They walked over, boots thudding on concrete. One stood to Chase's left, one blocked the bench, and Grant stopped just in front of him, smirking. "You dress like that just to sit in the park?" Grant asked, voice full of mockery. Chase looked up, measured and calm. "I'm waiting for someone." Grant's eyes drifted to the soccer field, spotting Ben. "Cute kid." "Yours." "My brother," Chase replied, closing the book gently. "That right," Grant said, circling. "You look like you're trying too hard. You some kind of activist or something?" He nodded toward the pin, trying to make a statement. "No," Chase said simply, "just being myself." That was when the tone shifted. The laughter died down. Grant's smirk flattened. He took a step closer, too close. "Guys like you," he muttered, "think you're untouchable just because the world's soft now. But not everyone forgets what freaks are." The 2 others moved in, forming a half circle. The exit was blocked. Chase's hand stayed still, resting on the bench. No fists, no panic. He looked at Grant and said calmly, "You don't want to do this." The warning wasn't a threat. It wasn't loud, but it came from a place rooted deeper than fear. And maybe that's why Grant laughed. Loud, cruel, and certain that nothing serious could come from a boy in dress shoes and a rainbow pin. Chase stood up slowly. He wasn't tall, he wasn't bulky, but something about the way he rose steady, precise, made even the wind stop moving. "You hear that, boys?" Grant barked. "We don't want to do this." The first hand came toward Chase's shoulder, aiming to shove him back down, but it never landed. Chase pivoted, body low, redirecting the arm with surgical control. The biker stumbled sideways, off balance, and in that second, the quiet shattered. The moment of threat, the moment of decision, the moment no one watching would ever forget. But that moment belongs to the next part of the story. If Chase's quiet courage moved you, follow Hart's story to keep walking beside him. Part 2 will show what happens when calm turns into strength and silence turns into a storm. Don't miss it. Grant didn't hesitate. His friend had stumbled, but that only seemed to excite him more. He cracked his knuckles and moved forward, eyes locked on Chase. The way Chase stood, feet evenly spaced, shoulders relaxed, gave no signal of fear. It was the kind of posture Grant had never learned to read and would soon regret misjudging. "You really think you scare me," Grant spat. "You're just a suit, a soft little badge on your chest and a mouthful of words." Chase didn't respond. His silence wasn't surrender, it was calculation. When Grant lunged, it was messy, driven by ego and adrenaline. Chase stepped aside, allowing Grant's momentum to carry him forward. Then, with fluid precision, he used Grant's weight against him, hooking an arm and flipping him sideways. Grant landed hard on the grass, stunned. That was when the second biker jumped in faster, trying to grab Chase from behind. But Chase had trained for this since he was 6, not in tournaments for trophies, but in quiet dojos where breath control mattered more than brute force. He ducked, pivoted, and brought the biker to the ground in 2 clean moves. The man gasped, arm pinned, unable to process how quickly he had lost the upper hand. The third hesitated. Chase looked him in the eye. No words, just a stare that said, "This ends now, or it ends worse." But he charged anyway. This time, Chase met the blow with a block so sharp it knocked the biker's arm upward. A sweep to the legs followed. The biker tumbled, crashing into the bench they had once surrounded. It all took less than a minute. Grant groaned on the ground, his pride more wounded than his body. The others scrambled to their feet, dazed and panting. The small crowd that had formed watched in frozen disbelief. No one cheered. No one intervened. They had seen something they didn't quite understand, something they weren't sure how to name. In the back of that crowd stood Mason. He hadn't planned to record anything when he came to the park. He had only wanted a moment of quiet. But the sound of the engines had pulled his attention. And when he saw who the bikers were, when he saw Grant, something old and sharp twisted in his chest. He pulled out his phone. Mason hadn't seen Chase before, but the way Chase moved, the calm on his face, the control in his hands, it didn't look like a fight. It looked like a line being drawn, a quiet line, drawn by someone who didn't want attention. Only peace. Mason held the phone steady. He recorded it all: Grant's fall, the others scrambling, Chase standing tall but still, not triumphant, not angry, just steady, like he had done what needed to be done, and nothing more. Chase didn't glance at the camera. He didn't look at the crowd. His eyes searched only for Ben, who was still on the soccer field, wide-eyed, watching everything. Chase walked over, knelt beside him, and whispered something no one else could hear. The bikers limped away. No sirens, no screaming. Just 3 men suddenly unsure of themselves, shrinking under the weight of a truth they couldn't name. Mason watched them leave, and only then did he stop recording. What he would post later would not just be about a fight. It would be about a boy in a suit who never raised his voice, but still made the ground shift under 3 men who thought they ruled it. But that part of the story belongs to tomorrow. By the time the sun set that evening, Fairfield had returned to its ordinary rhythm. Soccer balls were packed away. Children left the park with juice-stained fingers. And the whispers about that boy in the suit had already begun. But in one quiet apartment not far from that park, Mason sat still in front of his phone. The footage played back in silence. No music, no edits, just the raw truth. Chase, surrounded. Then Chase, moving with calm precision. And finally, Chase walking away, not looking for praise, not claiming victory, just making sure his little brother was safe. Mason watched it again. Then, without adding a single filter or cutting a single frame, he uploaded it with a caption, "Gay teen dismantles hate without raising his voice." The video went live at 7:14 p.m. By midnight, it had over 400,000 views. By morning, the numbers had more than doubled. But it wasn't the views that made the difference. It was the words that came with them. Thousands of comments flooded in. Strangers from across the country wrote things like, "This gave me chills. He didn't fight for himself. He fought for all of us." And one voice stood out above the rest, the voice that had filmed it. Mason posted again. This time, it wasn't just about Chase. It was about why Mason had filmed the video and why he had to say something now. Even though it made his hands shake, he didn't just fight back. He fought for people like me too. Grant used to threaten me. We used to be close. The words hung in the air like smoke. Until then, Grant had been just another bully to the internet, Just another angry boy caught doing something cruel. But Mason's second post pulled back the curtain. People began connecting dots. Screenshots surfaced. Old messages. Stories that had been whispered quietly in bathrooms, classrooms, back seats now spilled out in comments and threads. Mason didn't name names beyond Grant, but it was enough. Enough for others to come forward. Enough for someone to recognize the last name. Wyatt, not a common name in Fairfield, and not one easily missed when tied to an election. Grant Wyatt, younger brother of Thomas Wyatt, city councilman, candidate for mayor. Suddenly, the video wasn't just a story of a brave boy in a park, it was a political storm. Local news outlets picked it up, first the online blogs, then Fairfield's main station. Viral video, involving brother of mayoral candidate raises questions. They didn't say much, not yet. But the image from the thumbnail, Chase in his suit, pin still gleaming, hand extended mid-block, spread like wildfire. The narrative changed overnight. This wasn't about self-defense anymore. It was about accountability, about silence, about power used to silence people like Mason, and what happens when someone, like Chase, refuses to be silent anymore. Mason stayed offline after that. He had said what he needed to say. The storm could carry itself now. At school the next day, Chase didn't speak much. He didn't need to. Everyone had already seen the video. Whispers followed him down every hallway. Some respectful, some unsure, a few hateful, but none of it reached him. Because Chase didn't look at them. He looked only for Ben waiting by the lockers, a little confused by the attention, but proud in a way he didn't yet know how to express. The world had seen the clip, but the world didn't know yet what Chase would do next. That part was still coming. Chase never wanted to be on the news. He didn't crave interviews or trending hashtags. He hadn't stood his ground to become a headline. He did it because no one else had, and someone had to. But the world doesn't leave quiet people alone when they go viral. Overnight, requests poured in from talk shows, podcasts, reporters, even advocacy groups. Some offered compensation. Others wanted to frame him as a hero, a symbol, a face to place on a movement. Chase declined them all. He didn't respond with anger or shame, just silence. His inbox stayed full. His phone lit up with unknown numbers. But Chase kept showing up to school, to class, to the same park where it all began, walking Ben home like nothing had changed, because for him, nothing had not in the way that mattered. At home, things weren't so steady. His parents tried to be calm, but the tension showed in their voices. His mother kept checking the locks at night. His father asked him if he wanted to change schools. Neither of them said the word retaliation, but it hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Chase only asked one thing, just make sure Ben's okay. That was all that mattered, and that Ben wouldn't carry the weight of this. That the innocence in his little brother's eyes wouldn't be dimmed by online noise or real-world whispers. But Fairfield didn't stop spinning. Thomas Wyatt, the rising political star, faced his own reckoning. For days, he ignored the reporters, walked quickly past microphones, dodged questions with stiff smiles. But pressure builds, and silence breaks. In a tightly controlled press conference outside City Hall, Thomas stood in front of a row of flags and said the words everyone had waited for: I love my brother, but I cannot defend his actions. I do not condone violence, and I will not allow my campaign or this city to be tied to hatred. The words were careful, scripted, delivered in a voice that knew how to win voters. But something about his expression wavered at the end, as if part of him knew he had come too late. It wasn't enough. Not for those who had suffered in silence. Not for Mason, who had held those memories for too long. And certainly not for Chase, who hadn't asked for any of this attention, but now carried its weight alone. A week after the video, a local journalist finally caught up to him outside the school gates. She held a microphone to his face and asked gently, Chase, is there anything you'd like to say now that the city is listening? He looked at her, unblinking, and said, I didn't stand up to be seen. I stood up because I had to. because no one else would. Then he walked away. No further comment, no speech, just those words. They echoed louder than any press release. In corners of the city, Chase would never walk through. Strangers repeated that line. Teenagers whispered it to each other before stepping into hostile classrooms. Teachers quoted it without knowing where it came from. Mason printed it and taped it to the wall above his desk. It was never about going viral. It was never about politics. It was about holding the line quietly, firmly, without asking for anything in return. And still, Chase returned to the park every Saturday. He sat on the same bench, watched Ben play, and carried the silence like a shield. But even the strongest shields need purpose. And that part of the story, what Chase chose to do with the voice he never asked for, is still unfolding. The city remembered the boy in the suit, but Chase never asked them to. While Grant faced a formal investigation, the footage Mason had posted sparked more than just public anger. It sparked memory. One by one, others began to speak. Names once buried beneath fear surfaced with quiet strength. Former classmates, employees at a local gym, even a delivery driver who recalled being cornered behind a store. None of them had spoken before. But after watching Chase stand, after hearing his words, because no one else would they found theirs, the district attorney announced that multiple complaints had been filed. The charges: harassment, threats, in some case, physical assault. Not all incidents would hold in court, but they painted a picture long denied and carefully hidden behind a powerful name. Grant Wyatt was no longer just a bully caught on camera. He was a symbol of something Fairfield didn't want to admit still existed. And Chase, he stayed out of it, out of the press, out of the spotlight. But he wasn't idle. 3 weeks after the video, flyers quietly appeared in community centers, schools, and corner cafes. Free self-defense class for teens who have ever felt unsafe. Instructor Chase, Saturdays at 10 a.m., Fairfield Park. It wasn't a grand announcement. No logos, no sponsors, just plain white paper with black text and a time. The first Saturday, 5 kids showed up. One wore sleeves too long for the weather. Another avoided eye contact. And Ben was there too, standing tall beside his brother, arms folded like a tiny bodyguard. Chase didn't speak much that morning. He just laid out mats, bowed at the start, and began. No speeches, no references to the video, just breath work, footing, awareness, how to redirect instead of react, how to move without fear. Week by week, the group grew. By the second month, there were 15, then 23. Mason came one morning, not as a student, but just to watch. He stood at the edge of the field, unsure if he belonged. But when Chase noticed him, he didn't hesitate. He walked over and said quietly, "Thank you for turning the camera on." Mason smiled, the kind that carried more weight than words. "You turned something much bigger on, Chase. You turned on a fire in all of us." Chase didn't reply. He didn't need to. The moment passed like a current between them, silent, certain, and real. The final image wasn't captured by any phone. It wasn't shared online, but it stayed with everyone who saw it. Chase, standing among a group of kids. None of them famous, all of them learning to take up space. His black shirt tucked neatly, the LGBT pin still on his chest. The boy once called a freak, now quietly leading others out of their fear, not with noise, not with rage, but with steady, earned strength. He never wanted to be a symbol, but sometimes symbols rise whether we ask them to or not. And Chase, he just stood there, eyes forward, shoulders squared, ready, because now he wasn't standing alone. And maybe that's the power of one quiet act done with conviction. Would you have turned the camera on? Tell us in the comments, and if this story lit something in you, share it forward. Follow Heart Story for more stories that remind us courage doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands.